You have exactly 3 seconds to like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, I'll appear in your dreams tonight. To ask for a donation for that cup of coffee, link below.
This is the Korean Peninsula, where the legacy of the Cold War has yet to end. For decades, a line crossing the 38th parallel divided this land in two. Viet Nam is the modern South Korea when it comes to poppin' billionaire corporations. When North Korea was a mysterious country, he only appeared in the news with missile launches or tensions with the US. But more than half a century has passed, and while the world has witnessed the reunification of Vietnam, Korea remained divided. By this point, the dream of reunification had almost completely vanished. But why? Imagine you are a young, from family stories. You know you still have relatives on the other side of the border, those who were unable to evacuate in time when the war broke out. After more than 7 years without communication being cut, the two sides have completely lost contact. You now know nothing about North Korea beyond what the news reports in your eye. It's a terrifying country, a constant threat. They are the ones who constantly launch missiles to threaten to wipe out your country. So you have to do military service. And gradually you stop seeing Koreans as your compatriots. You might even begin to suspect that those relatives might also harbor ambitions to invade their homeland on the other side of the latitude. Your cousin has the same idea. She had heard that your family had migrated south before the country was completely divided. But what she learned was much more than that South Korea is a puppet of the West, traitor to the nation. It's quite possible that in her eyes, you've become an enemy as well. That's the bitter truth. As time, geographical records gradually become distances in our minds. Statistics from 2024 by status show that only 9% of South Koreans believe unification is necessary, a record low since 2007. The percentage opposing unification is increased. Reach most the younger generation. People in their early 20s and 30s today are less likely to view North Korea as a fellow countryman. They held a cautious, even view of the North. They are also the least supportive of public affairs. The percentage of South Koreans aged who support unification has decreased from 54% to 2023. On the North Korean side, it is difficult to obtain data from opinion polls like this, but simply by looking at the statements of the supreme leader, one can clearly see the stance of the entire regime. 2020, at the 10th session of the Supreme People's Assembly, Chairman Kim Jong-un unexpectedly officially announced the abandonment of the goal of peaceful reunification of Korea. He asserted that South Korea is no longer a fellow countryman but the #1 enemy of North Korea. At the same time, North Korea is prepared to wage war against both South Korea and the United States to protect the survival of its regime and reclaim the entire peninsula. That statement effectively put an end to any hope of peaceful reunification. This has deep roots in the growing ideological, cultural, and economic differences between the two regions following a long period of division. The fundamental difference lies in political ideology. South Korea, capitalist country that adopts a parliamentary republic model and a presidential system, despite having experienced periods of authoritarian rule before the 21st century. South Korea is now recognized as a developed democracy. This place has a multi-party system and its citizens are empowered to vote. This country has a market economy and is dominated by giant corporations like Samsung and Hyundai. North Korea follows the path of. However, unlike Vietnam or China, it has abandoned economic reforms. North Korea follows a totalitarian state model, where the Kim family holds absolute. The country's economy still maintains a centralized planned economy model. Pyongyang remains hesitant to open up North Korea and South Korea are therefore complete opposites. Harmony between these two political models is virtually impossible unless one side accepts fundamental change But in reality, both believed that their system was superior. Both sides were prepared to use force to survive. North Korea is becoming increasingly aggressive in strengthening its military power, particularly in expanding its nuclear weapons program. This country is believed to possess a variety of nuclear missiles with diverse ranges and high accuracy, capable of penetrating the air defense systems of South Korea and its allies. According to a report by the U.S. Department of Defense, alone, the country conducted at least 47 launches of religious rockets. South Korea is also not far behind. This country is trying to build a self-reliant defense system instead of relying on international aid and imports. The localization rate of national weapons systems has increased from 70. Currently, South Korea is capable of domestically producing many key weapons such as the KF-21 fighter jet and the K-9 self-propelled artillery. At the same time, Seoul has been continuously conducting military exercises with allies such as the United States to both enhance its combat capabilities and deter. This constant military confrontation has also fueled growing animosity between the people of the two regions. The Korean people have always lived in fear of invasion from the north. Koreans believe that the south is the cause of that animosity. This contrasting political landscape also created a range of profound socio-cultural differences between the two. Due to its pro-American stance, Korean culture has a strong tendency towards westernization. So, today prioritize freedom over privacy and human rights, and a modern lifestyle. The vibrant nightlife districts of Seoul and Busan have become symbols of a carefree lifestyle. Due to sanctions and limited contact with the outside world, North maintained a secluded lifestyle rich in East Asian traditions. Living for the collective and discipline remain. The music and costumes largely retain the style of previous. The distance also clearly demonstrates the linguistic. Not only are the regional forms of the language different, but the vocabulary and usage have diverged in two completely different directions. Modern Korean borrows heavily from English. The Korean language is predominantly spoken and borrows heavily from Chinese. In addition, North tend to prefer using more purely original words compared to South Koreans. In the future, even if you both speak Korean, you and your cousin may still find it difficult to understand each other. North Korean defectors to South Korea are the group that experiences this difference most acutely. They had to relearn how to live in a completely new society and face discrimination. According to a 2021 survey by the Han Foundation, nearly 3,000 North defectors said they had experienced discrimination in the past 12 months. The main reason is cultural differences. 44% said they had experienced discrimination simply because they were from the North. Nearly 23% said they felt looked down upon because they lacked the same educational qualifications or work skills as Koreans. In addition, these people also suffer from a loss of self-identity. While in the North, they were all too familiar with simply following orders from the state. In South Korea, they have freedom, choices, and but that very fact left them feeling lost, unsure of who they were. Thus, these vast differences are gradually eroding the bonds of identity that connect the two regions. If this separation continues, the people will gradually drift apart, as if belonging to two separate ethnic groups, and then unification would simply be a burden that the other half would want to avoid. Now, reunification and peace can only become a reality if both sides share the same aspiration. However, seems to be gradually given up, not for political reason, but because of economic concerns. In the two regions were developing but today the gap has widened significantly. South Korea is among the world's 15 largest economies. On the other hand, completely isolated from global trade due to international sanctions. We don't have accurate figures on the North Korean economy. However, the reality is that the country still maintains a centralized model and is heavily dependent on China and Russia. Based on images publicly available to the world, it appears that North Korea primarily invests in Pyongyang and a few other locations. The remaining majority are still poor rural areas. If South Korea were to be unified, it would have to spend trillions of dollars to support the North. according to City's 2018 analysis. Infrastructure restoration alone required over 1 railways, 8 billion for road, and for power plant. The initial emergency spending estimate also amount. These are enormous numbers, enough to drag down any major economy. The lessons from Germany after its reunification in 1990 remember. At 9, West Germany still had to spend nearly $2 trillion to catch up with the other side. To this day, the unemployment rate in East Germany remains higher than in the West. The average income in the 3 eastern regions was only 73% compared to the western region. From this, it can be seen that a reunification not only creates budgetary pressure but also brings about divestment consequences. Not only the economy but also South Korea's social welfare system could be in turmoil. Unification could open up many opportunities such as cheap labor, abundant natural resources, and a new market with great potential. But the reality is different. Millions North Koreans could flock to the South in search of work, disrupting the labor market and putting immense pressure on already overloaded healthcare and housing system. At the same time, differences in mindset, culture, and education levels after decades of stagnation can lead to simmering conflicts and social. Koreans have never been exposed to a market economy. Training them to adapt will require enormous time and resources, with young South Koreans struggling with unemployment, soaring housing prices, and an uncertain future. The dream of reunification could potentially crush their entire future. Unifying the priorities is something everyone supports. It promises to bring peace and stability to the entire region. But in reality, the major power don't really want this. The Korean Peninsula has long been a geopolitical chessboard for the United States, China, Russia. In that scenario, Washington and Beijing are the two. Neither side wanted to agree on a speaker because in any scenario, they wouldn't gain absolute advantage. The first scenario is that Seungri leads the unification process. For the people of the South, this was good news at the time, as the peninsula would tilt decisively toward Washington. This means that China's eastern security perimeter will be disrupted by a U.S. military base located right on its doorstep. At the same time, Beijing is virtually blocked from accessing the sea because it is surrounded by Washington's allies and partners. Not to mention the rapid accumulation of resources by the North will cause millions of refugees to flood in, creating pressure and threatening the country's domestic security. But Washington also doesn't benefit because a pact in Beijing will retaliate strongly for survival. China could increase pressure in areas where the does not yet have full, such as the South China Sea and Taiwan, as well in areas where the two sides have fierce competition, such as trade. Therefore, for Beijing, maintaining the status quo remains the safest option. This country has both maintained a strategic buffer zone and holds a card to restrain the United States. The second scenario is Pyongyang unifying the. But this is also the scenario that the US fears most. Washington would lose South Korea. She would push militarily closer to both China and Russia. And she would also lose a leading economic and technological ally in. If we adopt defensive strategies from the US, Japan, and South Korea, they will be therefore, from China's perspective, the US wants to maintain the status quo of a divided but stable peninsula where they hold the upper hand. However, China cannot rest easy either. A unified nation that retains nuclear weapons would become an unpredictable force. This country has the capability to act independently, outside of Beijing's control. From being a shield, Pyongyang could transform into a tiger on Beijing's flank, making them wary. However, neutral Korea would also be detrimental to both the US and China. If the two regions can be reunited peacefully, then the nation can become a regional powerhouse. The South was already a developed economy. North possessed considerable military strength and mineral resources worth up to a strong and independent country will not be easily dominated by foreign power. They can choose their own unfortunate fate, just as Germany and Viet Nam have done. A unified and independent strategy would likely not lean heavily toward either side. The US and China must expend more resources to gain influence. And if they fail, one country may side with something neither wants. Therefore, the current division of Korea resembles a tacit agreement between the two nations, each willing to allow the other to act freely within its sphere of influence, as long as that boundary of power is not broken. Although Russia is not as concerned about its size as it was during the Soviet era, it still maintains strategic relations with Moscow. Views the divided peninsula as an opportunity to maintain indirect influence and hinder the US in East Asia. A unified South Korea loyal to the US would deprive Russia of strategic space in the far east and further encircle it within Washington's alliance. Amidst its isolation due to the conflict in Ukraine, Russia will increasingly seek closer ties with North Korea as a counterweight to the West. By 2025, Pyongyang had provided Moscow with thousands of soldiers and weapons, and therefore, Russia will not support the unification process because it would mean its interest in East Asia would be further diminished. Unlike the United States or China, Japan does not directly rely on military intervention, yet it is greatly affected by any developments on the peninsula. Tokyo fears a refugee crisis, internal conflict, or the risk of nuclear weapons falling into the hands of a unified, rebellious force. Japan has always been a thorn in the side of Pyongyang due to its history of repeated invasions. North Korea frequently threatens, and even launches missiles that fly over Japanese airspace. Furthermore, a unified and powerful North Korea would be a formidable rival threatening the economic position that Tokyo is trying to maintain. Therefore, slow and steady approach, supporting inter-Korean dialogue but not wanting the unification process to happen too quickly. The very countries capable of promoting unity are the very forces that are secretly holding back division. They worry that he will lose power and the initiative on this chessboard. A single tyrannical ruler who can eliminate all evil spirits could disrupt the entire order they had painstakingly built. Therefore, as long as the game is still being played by externals, the dream of reunification for the Korean people will remain just an illusion. On the day the two regions parted ways, everyone thought it was only temporary. Past. That temporary situation gradually became permanent, and family unity became the greatest luxury in their homeland. The tragedy of the president selling off his land is not new, product of grand schemes from outside, where powerful nations use this land to pursue their ambitions. But even more painful is the fact that those who are willing to sell out national interests for fame and money are causing the younger generation of both regions to gradually become estranged from the other half of the nation. Unification will probably remain just a Vietnamese dream. Music.